Hello, we're here with Scott Grant and myself, Jorge Rivera. You might know Scott Grant. He's been on the St. Augustine Tonight Show. He runs a very successful management asset company here in Ponte Vedra. Well, now you're in Jacksonville Beach.
Yeah, we were surprised. I moved into this space, and it's a nice space, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things I discovered after I moved in was that we are technically in Jacksonville Beach and not in Ponte Vedra. I sort of miss being in Ponte Vedra, but Jacksonville Beach is nice too, right?
It's really 7 minutes from where you were. It's not far at all.
No, it's not. And I'm closer to the monument that we put in for the dead guys. So.
Okay.
The dead guys, yeah. The
dead guys?
The guys that died in World War II. The 19
right.
guys that died in World War II.
Okay.
It's about 5 minutes from the memorial, which is nice if you want to dash over to the memorial.
And some of you might know Mr. Grant from his as a historian. He does a lot talking about history, not just of this area here, which he covers, but also, history dealing with the civil rights movement. I've done a little piece with him about a U-2 submarine that was off the coast of Jacksonville. As you could see here, here's some of the civil rights subjects that he covers, And so a lot of you will see him in this area giving dissertations or, small lectures on these historical events. But we were talking on the phone, and he said, Jorge, we should get together. The Olympics are coming up, which are already 1 year behind because of the pandemic. And we should talk about Olympics and maybe a couple of other things. And I said, why not? I set up my cameras, and I let the footage roll and see where we go with this. So this is us spontaneously talking about things we know, or we know little about, or we know a lot about, but this is not HBO Max. So let's take it from here. So,
well, we talked about you talked about '64, and part of the '64 story is Bob Hayes, and up there in the corner is Bob Hayes winning one of two gold medals at the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo, and this will be the second time that the Olympics have taken place in Tokyo. It was supposed to be last summer, got postponed. The first time the Olympics were supposed to be in Tokyo, they got canceled altogether in 1940 because of World War II. And I was telling you that they actually did a thing called the Pan-Asiatic Games, and that there were teams from occupied China and Thailand and the Philippines, and even a team from Hawaii.
Hawaii was still territory, so they still had some autonomy.
So they sent some Hawaiians to these games. I don't know exactly why, but the Japanese won most of the medals. Which is not the way it goes in '64, and probably not the way it'll go this summer either.
Right.
But in 1940, the Japanese won almost all the medals.
Well, we have to say, in these Olympics, they look really strong. What I was really surprised is all these African Japanese that are the stars, or some of the stars. You have this, I think his name is Rui Harimuro or Hashimuro. His father's African, his mother's Japanese. Then you have, she plays tennis, Naomi Osaka. Her dad is from Haiti. Her mom is Japanese. So to see these Japanese that are mixed race, because Japan is very into their purity race thing, is very interesting. And how well, as a matter of fact, the Rui Harimuro will carry the flag with the top wrestler. I can't think of her name. She's a woman wrestler. She's taken all the gold medals in all the world wrestling competitions. So Japan really feels like she might win a gold medal in her weight category as a wrestler. So they have a female and a mixed race Japanese carrying the flag of Japan. Wow! I mean, that is
pretty stunning. You think about American servicemen in Germany. Elvis met a girl over there, right? And a lot of guys do. So probably the same thing happens in Japan. And so that is pretty interesting.
That the sort of the Japanese opening up to the world in this sense, because they've always been so Japanese.
I just read that foreigners are not allowed to travel to Japan for the Olympics as spectators.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of controversies. First one is there's a bunch of Japanese who don't want the Olympics. Then there's been this sexism comments that have been like all over the news, and every time they feel like they're coming out of the hole, someone opens his mouth and they drop right to the bottom of the pit again. So there's a lot, and that's another one, you know.
So once again, we're going to have an Olympics that's, largely a Japanese event, except, of course, there will be a lot of competitors from all sorts of countries all over the world who will win lots of medals.
Well, there's 339 medals, I think, up for stake. I don't know how many events, but now there's new. Surfing will be in this Olympic. Baseball will come back because I think baseball once was in the Olympics.
Baseball has been in the Olympics off and on.
Off and on. So now it's back on. Skateboarding is another one. And I believe there's 3 more disciplines, let's call them, that will be in this Olympic that is, add a little bit more to it.
Well, host countries are always allowed to add something, and they typically pick an event that's popular in their country for obvious reasons, not just to win medals, but to have people come out and watch.
Well, in the baseball, they're going to have a Japanese pitcher who was big. He retired. He was big in the MLB, in the major league. I can't remember his name, but he'll be pitching for Japan.
That's interesting. So I haven't seen that much.
And also,
there's a guy from the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, I think, who's on the American team. I just read that today.
Well, and then there's Australia in basketball. Australia's team has 6 Australians that play for the NBA. So it's gonna
you and I like this topic, by the way.
Well,
these teams. There's these great teams that come from other countries. They're typically never quite good enough to beat the U.S. But, There's Puerto Rican teams and some famous Yugoslavian teams.
Puerto Rico always has a good basketball team. Brazil tends to have Argentina. Yugoslavia used to, when it was Yugoslavia.
That's still in my mind one of the greatest basketball teams of all time.
Yugoslavia was just awesome.
Drazen Petrovic,
the Russians, of course.
Vlade Divac, Dino Raja, and Tony Kukoc. Yeah. And that was a fun
in
team.
1972, Puerto Rico beat that team in Yugoslavia in the games that stunned everybody. But Puerto Rico had the speed because they're all. I think the tallest guy was like 6'1", 6'3".
They had some good. We talked about this the other day. I can't remember the guy's name, but they had some good basketball players. They had some good basketball players. There's a kid from Jacksonville who made the U.S. 100 meter team, Kendall Williams.
Right.
And so he'll be running, though I don't think he's a favorite. And I want to say he's not going to win a medal, but he's not a favorite to win a medal, I don't believe.
Well, in gymnastics, which is one of the favorite sports Americans love to watch in the Olympics, you have the girl Biles.
Right.
Yeah. And then you got this young man who's 21, Malone, who's just killing it. I mean, he is just so perfect in all his gymnastic, which is what they call that pony thing, the floor exercise, the rings. He just floats. He's really, really. They think his big contender is a Japanese guy, who's amazing. That'll be the guy to beat. But they think he will be on the podium at one medal, whether it's bronze, silver, or gold. Malone, and that'll be interesting to watch him. I think that the Biles. I think she's just indestructible.
Yeah, there's certain times in certain sports where. People seem invincible.
Yes, there's that one person.
And she would be one of those people, I think, that seems invincible. Though you never know.
Where all the Greek gods look down and say, yes, we bless her with power.
Actually, a guy that in retrospect seems invincible and may have seemed somewhat invincible at the time, certainly during the games, is Hayes.
Hayes.
We came to talk today a little bit about Hayes, and I think... it's important we do because he's, I think, probably the greatest athlete ever to come out of our area.
Right.
And I said that to somebody the other day, and they said, they weren't sure. And I said, well, it's open. There's some really good swimmers quite a few good swimmers that come out of this area in Olympics. And he said, Tim Tebow. What about Tim Tebow? I said, well, Tim Tebow's a great athlete. I don't know that he's Bob Hayes.
Yeah, he's not Bob Hayes.
And then the guy says to me, well, what did Bob Hayes do?
He's talking out of ignorance. He's cutting down a guy because he doesn't know him. He's sort of.
And I know at some point we're going to cut in some footage.
I guess you told him, yeah, what he did.
I think to a certain extent it's not worth arguing with people about a lot of things. People have their opinions, and you're not going to change it.
Right.
I mean, I can sit there and show them footage of Bob Hayes racing down the track at breathtaking speed. And he still wouldn't.
He had the record not too long ago, I think.
Well, it's a funny thing about the record. He still holds 2 Olympic records.
So for those who don't know who Bob Hayes is, his sport was?
He was a track and field and a football player, and he wins 2 gold medals in the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo. One in the 100-meter dash, and the other in the 4x100-meter relay. He's also a football player, and he goes to Florida A&M. He's from what's now Raines High School in Jacksonville, what used to be Matthew W. Gilbert High School. He goes to Florida A&M to play football for Jake Gaithers, who's sort of this legendary football coach from the pre-integration days of football in the South, and ultimately plays for the Dallas Cowboys.
Right. And
he plays, I think, 7 or 8 years for the Cowboys, 1 year for the San Francisco 49ers. And during that time, he has a really phenomenal career, but one of the things he does is he wins a Super Bowl with Roger Staubach. So one of Hayes' claims to fame is that he's the only person ever to win an Olympic gold medal and a Super Bowl. And you think about how much we worship those 2 items. Right? I mean,
And that someone can actually say, who was he again?
Right. Well, I think he's largely forgotten in this area. And we could go into all the reasons
sad.
why.
He's from this area. There should be high schools named after him.
There should be high schools named after him.
Yeah.
I agree. I think there should be high schools named after him.
And that's crazy that there's not, because he passed away, did he?
Yeah, he passed away in the early 2000s of cancer, and he had not yet been admitted to the Football Hall of Fame. So he was admitted. He's admitted or inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame posthumously.
Right. Because he had troubles with the law.
Yeah, he had a couple incidents with the law. One in Tallahassee while he was a student at Florida A&M. He was accused of stealing like 6 cents and half a stick of gum from a fellow student. And apparently he gave the cops a confession. Now he contends later that the confession was coerced, but he gave the cops a confession, and they were going to send him to prison for 6 cents.
I'm here for a piece of gum and a nickel and a penny. It was a buffalo head,
I mean, it sounds crazy now, but Jake Gaithers, again, this legendary football coach who was at Florida A&M for decades.
Didn't he get heat? No, it wasn't him. I think it was this track and field coach that got heat for not allowing him time to practice. Or
no, it was
something
it was Gaithers.
It was?
LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States in 1964, calls Jake Gaithers and says, "Look, I'm worried that you're playing Hayes in every football game because the Olympics that year were delayed until October, so they fell in the middle of football season."
Right.
He says, "I'm worried you're using Hayes in the football games. He's going to get hurt. That's going to cost the United States a gold medal."
Yeah.
And
this was during the Cold War thing where the medals meant a lot.
Right. Well, they did. They were still.
They were real gold in those days.
Actually, in Rome in 1960, it's an East German guy named Armin Harry wins the gold. And so, there was definitely, this idea that the 100 meters was always an American event. It was an event that we won more often than not.
Right.
And in 1960, we didn't win it. An East German professional.
There was sports like basketball, the Americans. Hockey was the Russians. It was always this thing. That's why I think it was 1980 when the Americans took the hockey medal from the Russians was such a big deal.
That was a huge deal. I remember that. That was a huge deal. For people of that generation, that was a huge deal. And the idea that, we actually beat the Russians, a bunch of college kids beat the Russian, pretty much a professional Russian team.
Oh, yeah. They call themselves amateurs, but they're all professionals. That's all they do day and night.
That technically, I think, was the Russian army team. So they were all in the army. They're probably all colonels and captains and such.
It's Dragos, Rocky. You're going to fight Dragos.
And you go out and you fight. Yeah, that's what they did. So 64, there was that element. It was also the first time the Olympic Games had actually taken place in Asia. So, it was a kind of a phenomenon in that part of the world that all these people were coming, to Tokyo to compete.
Right.
And Hayes, we're talking about the records. Hayes sets a record that day, and he sets a couple records that still stand.
Right.
One of them is that nobody's ever run faster than Bob Hayes in the Olympics on a cinder track.
Right.
Just as fast as anybody got on that old kind of track.
Right.
The other is he still holds the record for the largest margin of victory in the 100-meter finals, about 7 feet.
But yeah, because when you look at the footage, everything they're using looks so heavy.
Yeah.
Even the clothes they're wearing, even the shoes they're wearing, Now you have swimmers that wear things that are so thin, they're almost like, they're lighter than if they're naked.
Well, and a lot of effort was put into making all that stuff lighter.
Right.
Because, particularly for runners and for swimmers too, and then less drag for the swimmers in particular.
Drag, weight, all that.
So you go faster.
That you have the flexibility to move.
And the tracks too. I mean, now the tracks are made out of some kind of polyurethane. They have a spring where the cinder tracks you sort of just dug your foot into the cinder. Now, prior to cinders, they ran on dirt, which was probably even worse.
Yeah, and I think the track he was on wasn't in the best shape.
No,
he was running. There was an event before that, and they had trashed it. And
it was one of those weird walking races. And I remember when I was young, they would show the walking races. I don't think.
And you go.
Yeah, because they're long and they have a very specific gait. It's heel, what they call heel toe. So you have to put your heel down and then your toe, heel down and then your toe. So it kind of looks funny.
Right.
But I forget how many meters that was, that walking race. But it was a long race. Of course, they all walk around the inside of the track because they get strung out over time, and they chewed up that part of the track. He also was running in borrowed shoes. The borrowed shoes are kind of a repetitive thing. But Joe Frazier, Smoking Joe Frazier,
Smoking Joe,
who also won a gold in '64.
Yes.
He's the other kind of really famous person from '64 besides Bob Hayes.
Right.
Smoking Joe Frazier was messing around with Hayes' equipment and lost one of his shoes. Hayes didn't realize until he got to the track for the finals. He only had one shoe in the bag.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And it's when you look back at, because not only has the equipment evolved, but the bodies have evolved too.
Yeah, I think
nutrition, the types of exercises they do, even their psychological evolution of how they treat themselves in the psyche to approach a game. If you watch a tennis match from the 50s, you can actually see the ball. Now you don't see the ball. You hear the racks hit it, but you don't really see the ball until it stops on the net. And the same thing with basketball. If you watch these basketball games from the 50s, now they're just moving so fast, and they're just and that's when you realize the evolution of the athlete himself physically.
And a lot of science goes into this.
Yes.
You talk about all the mathematics that has gone into modern baseball, all the math that went into running, like this lightness thing. I just wrote an article and talking about the guy that starts Nike, Bill Bowerman, the track coach from Oregon. He makes the waffle trainers with his wife's waffle iron. And that launches this business. But, he's out in his garage tinkering with his wife's waffle iron to try and make lighter shoes. For Steve Prefontaine to win a gold. And, that's what he's doing. But nowadays, you'd have a whole bunch of computers examining every aspect of the shoe.
And now you have 3D printers on top of that. It'll actually make what you see in your mind actually happen.
But in terms of the individual, the other thing I think you see in the Olympics, Hayes is a great example. He's either 20 or 21 in 1964. He runs. Now he goes almost immediately to play for the Cowboys, right? But Usain Bolt's will be running, I think, in his 4th Olympics. And you say, well, if it was, back then they had this very kind of strict amateur code.
Right.
So these guys, a lot of them, Hayes couldn't have afforded to support himself for another 4 years to train for a second gold.
And that was sad too, with athletes. Now they get so much support, but in the old days they were like on their own. And you read these stories how they trained, the sacrifices they had to do to be in the Olympics, and now they're, you know, they're just showered with gifts and time and money to help them out. So yeah, it's a whole different world than Hayes' world.
You know, I don't know what Usain Bolt makes every year, but I'm sure it's, you know, not insignificant.
Well, he can run to be president of. He can. Yeah, we'll get that. We're in an office, but he could run for president of Jamaica, and he'd win. I mean, that's where I see him go when he retires. That, you know, because he's so loved in Jamaica, all over the world.
Well, and he's a great runner.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go on record and say I believe that if we put the two guys on the same track,
Hayes and him,
Hayes and Usain Bolt, I believe on the same track and the same equipment, that Hayes would win. I honestly believe Bob Hayes from Jacksonville is the fastest man who ever lived.
Wow. Yeah. We need to sit down with my friend Carter Lord. He was drafted to Dallas, and he was with Hayes. He said Hayes was just a troublemaker, always, you know, making things happen. He would say, "Don't, the coach is watching. Don't ask me that question." You know, he tells these funny little stories. He knew Hayes, and he played. I think he was a lineman. Yeah, he's
and
big.
he was from Harvard, right, Carter?
Yeah, which is weird to get anything drafted out of Harvard, from the Ivy Leagues into the, you know what I'm saying? It's Texas A&M, it's Penn State, you know, these big universities with giant programs. So he had to be really good in order to pull him out of an Ivy League. You know, your political science degree, we'll put it aside while you bash people on the field.
Well, there's guys from the Ivies. In Harvard, it's one of the schools that produces more, but there are occasionally guys from the Ivies, linemen. It's not unusual for it to be.
I have a friend, Ron Kine. He's congressman for La Crosse, Wisconsin. He's in Congress. He was quarterback in Harvard.
Oh, neat.
He was quarterback. Yeah. Ron, if you're seeing this, we're talking about you, Ron Kine.
That's funny.
And so yeah, but
Hayes goes on to play football. So he may not have tried to come back and run in '68. He was playing for the Dallas Cowboys. He leads the league in touchdown catches each of the first two seasons.
Right.
And one of the things about Hayes is that he kind of changes the way football is played, because prior to that, you know, you'd have a defensive back, they call him a defensive halfback back then, would line up and he would cover a receiver, you know, one-on-one.
Right.
Well, if the guy you got to cover is the fastest man in the world, you need help.
Well, yeah.
So they invent zone defenses to try and contain
You can see yourself, the guy who covers him, and the coach screaming at you, "Why did you let him go?" Because he's the fastest man in the world, coach.
Yeah, you know, imagine you're a defensive back in the mid-'60s, and you're pretty fast, right? You're the fastest guy on your team, and you're looking at Bob Hayes.
Well, yeah, but as soon as Bob Hayes cuts you and then takes off, you know you're not going to catch up. You're just not going to catch up.
And I don't know that he still does, but for a long time, Hayes held the record for the 60-yard dash, which was typically an indoor event.
Right.
And probably doesn't get as much attention these days. And so, you know, Usain Bolt may not be out trying to break that record. But for a long time, he had it. So he had some short distance sprint.
Well, you know, black athletes are amazing. I was reading also about the guy from Ethiopia who won the marathon or whatever in 1960 Olympic or whatever, and he ran barefoot. He ran barefoot.
Yeah.
And so he's going to Rome running barefoot and wins the marathon.
Yeah, that's a big story from the Rome Olympics, which are just 4 years earlier.
Yeah, and you're like, wow, you know. So I think, you know, and there's a lot of athletes who dabble in two things. Like, look at this guy Mahomes from Kansas City, the quarterback. He did baseball.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why he can throw the ball in that baseball style where he shoots it like throwing the first base.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of people.
We have Deion Sanders and you have Bo Jackson. Those are two that come to mind.
Jordan, the basketball and baseball.
He didn't play baseball.
Both,
he ended up not playing baseball all that well, but
And even Carter Lord, who I was talking about, he also played baseball and he played football, and he was great in baseball too. So sometimes they have to decide which sport to actually put 100% in. Yeah,
and I think Hayes, based on what I know, would choose football every time.
Well, I think we got to cut it down now.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
got to shut it down, and it was about Bob Hayes, the Olympics. I think we covered everything. I hope you like this discussion. If you do, let us know. You have our emails, and it was great talking with
It's
Mr.
always
Grant.
fun.
It's always a
It's always
pleasure.
fun being with you, Jorge.
That's it. And the St. Augustine Tonight Show will come back in 2022 in January. So stay tuned on that.
I
on
like
our
that
platform.
show. I like that show. You had some good guests last time around.
Well, we'll see where we go this time. See you next time.